graduates up here have lots of information for you. And since they're all relatively new graduates, they have great stories for you, I'm sure. So I'm going to introduce them and then let each person tell you who they are, where they're at now, and how they got interested in healthcare. So we'll start with Kelly Elizondo, who is a graduate from '09. Go ahead. We'll do that first.
Like Linda said, my name's Kelly Elizondo. I'm now in Tomball at Tomball Regional Medical Center. It's part of Community Health Systems, which is the same company that owns College Station Medical Center. So that's where I started right after school, and I've been in Tomball now for a year.
And how'd you get into healthcare?
I actually was BIMS undergrad, and between undergrad and grad school, I worked at MD Anderson in a breast cancer research lab for a little over a year and decided I wanted to get back to seeing more people and not being in a lab, so I went back to school for that.
Next we have Lily Ricketts, who is a graduate from 2010.
Yes. I currently started, or when I first graduated, I had an opportunity to work for the Physician Center Hospital, and I very, very much enjoyed that position. I worked with Nina Brink. I don't know if many of you know her. She graduated a year earlier, so in '09, and had a great experience there. Then went over to College Station Medical Center, and I am now the director of the Wound Healing and Hyperbaric program there, and I have very much enjoyed it. And one of the things that really interested me in healthcare was the ability to make a difference in people's lives. And I think all of you are in this field and career because you want to change something, you want to make something better, you want to make life better for people. And it's a tremendous industry. And when I first started, like Kelly, I did a undergraduate degree in motor behavior with the intent on going to physical therapy. And I applied to physical therapy schools. I got into one and was starting to question whether or not that was something I really wanted to do, whether it be individual health or population health. And there was a guy, and he was staying here, and school was in Lubbock. And so it worked out. We got married, we have a kid. So I was very, very happy I stayed, and I'm very happy to be focusing on more of a population type health than individual health.
Next we have Stephanie Edwards, who also graduated in 2010.
After I finished at A&M, I did my administrative residency at Brazos Port. It was planned for a 2-year residency, and 6 months in, the CEO said, yeah, how about we just go ahead and skip straight to a job? And so it worked out. I'm now the director of ambulatory care. I manage 2 family medicine centers, an urgent care center, occupational health, the radiation oncology department of the cancer center, and a general and bariatric surgeon's office, as well as we are just bringing on a GI doctor. So pretty much everything that has to do with the physician practices kind of falls into my world. I would say the same as Lily. I think that my main interest in healthcare was initially to be able to do something that made a difference. I always tell this story. When I finished my undergraduate degree in business, I went to all the little standard interviews, and one of them was with Ferguson Company, and I didn't know what that meant. This was before I learned that you were supposed to kind of research the companies before you interview with them. So I'm sitting in the meeting, and they say, well, do you know what we do? I said, well, no, why didn't you tell me? I'm so excited to be here. And they said, well, we make toilets. And I just remember thinking, that is not my life's work. I cannot be a toilet maker. So it kind of came by accident that I fell into healthcare, but it's, like Lily said, it's really something that I have a passion for, and I think all of you are in an excellent field to make a difference at this time.
And last but not least, we have our newest graduate, Christina Holt, who graduated in May of 2011.
So I'm not as far removed, so your story is probably a little similar to or will be to how mine was, but I graduated in 2011. I was a BIMS biomedical science undergrad, so science was heavy and very important to me. I wanted to be in the healthcare field and did not want to be a doctor. I was sure of that after 4 years of science. And I took a couple classes as a MPH student. Dr. Cassius was one of them, and I really just loved it. And she, I remember I asked her one day if I should switch, and she encouraged me, and I did. And I really haven't looked back. I applied for the Aramark Fellowship and moved to Philadelphia for a year. That was a tremendous experience, and I'm now back in the Houston area working as a physician business manager for a private cardiologist.
All right, so now we'll open it up to questions.
So we do have a mic, so we're going to have to pass around for anybody that has a question. So does anybody have one starting off? Because I have a lot. No? Okay. So for starters, so what is the most difficult thing for you transitioning from school to work as far as a student and being a young woman in healthcare?
I guess I would say, and it was funny, we were just talking about this, your time here at SRPH is so intense, and it's so fast, and it's so full of pressure. And I know that all these ladies feel the same, but when you go home, there's always something you can be doing. There's always more studying you can be doing. There's always a paper you could be working on. And one of the biggest transitions for me, and it's a great transition, was that when 5 o'clock hits, most days, you go home and you have a life, and it's wonderful.
Get excited.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel, I promise. But I mean, there's some days that you work late, and there's some days that you work weekends, and it just happens that way. But it's nice to, after you transition out of being a student, to have a work-life balance.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's rewarding, but part of the pressure that you are under as a student really helps you to have good time management once you have a job and, you know, other responsibilities and bills to pay and a social life to maintain and that type of thing. So it's definitely beneficial to have this pressure, and it is really wonderful after you're done.
I think one of the most challenging things for me was I knew what I didn't know, and having to find it out, you know, not necessarily the hard way, but through experience and having to research. You know, you come out of school and you have this great understanding of the books, of your papers, on what's expected of you type of thing, but when you get into the field, it's very heavily regulated, and just learning those different regulations and how to effectively communicate with them, with people, was something that I found challenging. However, it was very interesting at the same time, because you have the basic foundation of what you'll need to survive and do well, but it's just learning those little details along the way that I found to be interesting, but yet still challenging.
I think a big struggle for me was coming out of school and being a young person in a leadership role. I went straight into a fellowship at the Med, but I still got asked, when are you going to finish school? Are you here as an intern? And just finding a balance of having confidence so that you come across as a leader, but also being humble and realizing that there are people there that have been doing that job for 20, 30 years, and you really have a lot to learn from them. So just kind of finding a balance in being in a leadership position and also being in a learning position at the same time.
I would just like to get y'all's advice, as I'm currently a first year, and I know we have several here, and just y'all's advice as far as searching for an internship and where y'all did your practicum.
I did mine at a small rural facility in Del Rio, Texas. It was Val Verde Regional Medical Center. And one thing I would advise you on looking for an internship is not to go where you want. It's almost like, don't go where you're planning on going, or don't go where you think you're supposed to go, or you have this preconceived notion of where you should be going. I had all along wanted to work in a major city, or maybe a Houston area where I'm from. And going to Del Rio and living in this very small town, working for this population that I'd really never seen before, and with individuals I wouldn't come across again, was such an eye-opening experience. I don't regret it for the world. I'm so happy that I did it. And I still want to work in a major city, but I feel so much smarter and more rounded, I guess, because I did something that wasn't what I was planning on doing. And now I'm actually, still thinking that maybe one day I will end up at a rural facility, just because I know what it was like. I had that experience to share.
I would say that just kind of keep your eyes and ears open to what opportunities present themselves to you. And I know at the time that you're in right now, it feels like the world is going to end if you don't get the right internship. And so to have a little perspective, anything you do, anywhere you go, I did mine at the Louisiana Public Health Institute in New Orleans. I actually started as an MPH as well. And it's funny because the experience that I had there working with medical records, electronic medical records, has served me so well on into my MHA career. So I know it's hard to say, but take some of the pressure off yourself. Be willing to accept whatever opportunity presents itself to you and learn from it, because it will be valuable no matter where it is or what you're doing.
Absolutely. I completely 100% agree with what Stephanie just said. I did my internship at Grimes St. Joseph, Navasota, Texas, and that was really interesting because I got to see the rural aspect of it and attend meetings, the management meetings at the hospital, and got to see the bigger system, or the mothership, as they like to call it. So that was very advantageous, and it was an experience that you very, very much value. Any experience that you have in a practical setting will be wonderful. So like Stephanie said, even though it's not what you had in mind and it's not your perfect internship, take it and make the most of it.
And I also did mine at a rural hospital. I went and did my internship with Nancy Kinkler at Otto Kaiser in Kennedy, Texas, South Texas. And it was a good experience to get to work with a female CEO and ask her struggles along the way, kind of how she got to where she was. She started out in a lab and then moved up to CEO. So it was a good experience. I think the important part of an internship is doing meaningful projects so that you have something to talk about the following year when you're interviewing for jobs. Because I don't know that they really look so much at where you were, but what you did. So that would be my key point.
I know a lot of us or some of us are going through like fellowship process right now, and we're about to go through interviews and phone interviews. Do you have any advice for us on how to prepare for the process and what we should do to make sure we're prepared properly?
I think something Stephanie said earlier is really huge, to know the hospital or the company that you're interviewing with. I also would try to find out who I was going to be talking to if possible, and with Google and LinkedIn now you can really kind of find out a little more about them. I don't know if y'all still have the binders that you keep with all the portfolio. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh. Well, I would have that in front of me.
Fancy.
Well, I would have that in front of me, and it had my resume and it had some projects I worked on, because sometimes they'll say, what's the most interesting class? And if you draw a blank, just flip to a page, or have something ready to talk about. But phone interviews were the easiest because you can sit there in your pajamas and feel a little more comfortable in what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I would just do your research, like Kelly said, and I would utilize the A&M, Career Center, and they have good interviewing tips, and they have a folder. It's someone you can meet with, and they can perfect what you say. Word choice is very, very important. So you may mean to say something a certain way, and it's just perceived a little differently because of that word choice. So I would utilize them for any interviewing help and guidance.
One of the biggest things for me is that when I'm moving into an organization, I really want to know that that it's a good fit personality-wise. And so I always try to get a feel for that. I remember going through that process of where you're kind of courting for fellowships, and I wanted this fellowship so bad. I knew it was my destiny, and I had an on-site interview, and I flew out to meet with them. And I got there, and I met with almost every administrative person with the system, and I just remember thinking, this is so not my style. This is just not me. I could be here and it would look great on my resume, but I wouldn't be happy here. So just keep that in mind. Things could look great on paper, and it could be just a bad fit for you personally. So just try to keep that in mind as well, I would say.
Well, I can give you a few logistical tips from personal experience. I had a fellowship interview with the Michael E. DeBakey VA in Houston, and I tried calling from my cell phone, or they call you actually, so I had awful reception, and my call got dropped 3 times in an interview. Nothing I could do about it. They were very kind about it. They weren't, they didn't embarrass me or anything, but that kind of thing could have been prevented if I had a landline for them to call. Things like that, things that you wouldn't kind of expect can make or break your interview. I followed up with one of the fellows, and they said, the part that was on the phone was great, but, obviously when they have hundreds of applicants, things like that matter. So you should always be prepared, prepare your questions and go over them, but don't read from a piece of paper. People can tell when you're not being yourself on the phone. Things like that. I know Mr. Buckley used to always tell us to wear a suit during our phone interviews because it would make you feel more confident. So maybe that'll help too.
I think finding a good fit is important because you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. My very first site interview, I really didn't feel comfortable with the place. It was not my style, but back when Dr. Johnson was here as our program director, he told us that we have to accept our first offer, and if you get an offer, you have to accept it. And I really woke up every day with an upset stomach because I thought, if they call me today, I'm going to have to tell them yes, and I don't want to. But luckily, I didn't get offered that position. But another thing is interview or apply everywhere. Don't just pick Dallas and Houston and send out. You may think, oh, I applied to 25 places because there's 25 places between Dallas and Houston, but it's really not enough. You need to apply everywhere. And Christina went to Philadelphia. You might not have been planning to go out of state, but you got to be open to go everywhere. And it's only a year or 18 months, and it really goes by really fast.
I think I applied to over 50 places, and the fellowship I actually got was through a connection. So, I mean, you can put out every application in the world, and it may or may not come back. So I think that's a good point, is just everywhere, put out your application.
And I actually wanted to go to the Northeast Coast. That was my goal. I mean, I applied for a lot in Texas. But I feel like you should apply for something that might give you an opportunity to learn something you'll never learn again. Like she said, it's not the end of the world if you don't like living there. It's a year or 2 years. So you can always come back or find another job somewhere else. So this is your opportunity to kind of explore something that you may not get to do ever again. So I would be, ambitious.
Good questions.
Hi. What are the greatest challenges in being in a healthcare leadership position as a woman?
I'll start. I think I've always harped about this. I harped about this a lot when I was in grad school. I feel like your professional dress is so critical, and I don't feel like the pressure is as heavy on men in this position, and you can make or break an impression by dressing too provocatively and or maybe just not the style of the organization you're in. And I think you really have to always be cognizant of that. Always make sure you're dressing for how is appropriate for the setting you're in and who you're going to be talking with. And I just can't I can't say enough about dressing appropriately in the workplace, because once that image is tarnished, it's hard to rebuild that powerful leadership image, I think.
I think this kind of goes hand in hand with a point that Kelly touched on earlier, which was the challenges facing young people in the workplace. So it's kind of like you have the odds stacked against you. You're a young female, and a lot of times the people that I employ are twice my age, have twice the work experience. I have male employees, and so socially sometimes it's a little strange. But I've been so pleasantly surprised at how willing people were to accept me as their boss. And I think that if you respect that boundary, as Kelly mentioned, be humble, be very humble about the things that you don't know. And when you are, and when you're honest about it, I think that people are more willing to accept you as a leader.
Absolutely. I recently had an opportunity to attend a Healthy Woman event, and there was a guest speaker. Her name was Dale Thomas, and she is the CEO of Winners by Choice. And she talked a lot about how difficult it is sometimes just to be female, because we tend to be really, really hypercritical of ourselves. And, if someone pays you a compliment, oh, wow, that's a great dress. And, oh, well, yeah, I just got it out of my closet. You try to downplay it instead of saying, oh, well, thanks. So one of the most difficult challenges I think I had as being a young female leader in a healthcare industry, as Stephanie mentioned, is that you're the boss of somebody who is a lot older than you. They have been doing it for a long time, and you're telling them, well, can you do it differently this way? And you get that pushback, and it's hard to build that credibility, especially if the dress isn't what it needs to be, that says, hey, I'm a respectable person, and I'm ready to work here. But I think just being young was difficult because you're in a setting that a lot of people know a lot of things, and you're still continuing to learn. But I would just be confident, be confident with your decisions, ask a lot of questions to your leaders, and proceed with caution. Just keep going forward and follow your heart and do what's right. At the end of the day what's right and what's wrong, and just be confident in those decisions.
And a good word of advice is to find a female mentor. It doesn't have to be a formal relationship where you are really being mentored by them, but even if you just pick someone out and say, I like how she handles herself, and I like how she deals with physicians, and I like how she deals with the CEO, or if she is a CEO, how she treats her other leadership team members. Really just kind of pick someone out and think about the good qualities in them and how you can adopt them.
Yeah. And you'll definitely have experience in that when you do your internship. You can say, you know what, that person did this really, really well. I'll use that in the future. Or I really didn't like how this person handled it. I might try something different. And so you can gain those knowledgeable insights when you do your internship.
Educate yourself is very important.
Mm-hmm.
When you come out of school, I feel like you know so much, and then when you get in the real world, you feel like you know nothing.
Yeah.
So how do y'all educate yourself on a constant basis? Is it something you just dive into, or do you actually read up? What do y'all do?
I think that you have to dive into it because you know what you don't know, and the only way you're going to find out what you don't know is to either experience it or read it. After my internship at Grimes St. Joe's, there was a lot of regulations that I wasn't very familiar with, specifically JCAHO regulations. So I think there's a manual in the MHA office, and if you can just read some of those standards and familiarize yourself on why certain things are done certain ways, meetings will make a lot more sense. It's kind of like, oh, I don't understand why we're doing this. And so that helped me a lot. And I think what Kelly said was very valuable is find somebody who you feel comfortable enough with to ask those questions. Say, I didn't really understand what the CEO was saying in this meeting. What did he mean by that? And you can really gain a better understanding, and they can break it down for you and into the whys and the hows. And just reading is good, and asking those questions and finding a mentor to assist you along the way.
I would say it's a good combination of the two. We've talked a lot about having employees that have worked in careers that are older than we are, and so I find that usually they have huge amounts of knowledge. And so just asking, why do you do it that way? And sometimes it's an issue of, well, then they'll teach you why, and then you can follow up by reading up online about it, or using any of the resources that you have available to you. And sometimes you'll learn through that way that that's just the way we've always done it. And so then that's a great opportunity for you to maybe reevaluate some things. So
I just try and stay up to date with like education events that ACHE has, that type of thing. Anything I try and do on a daily basis for my job. The internet is heaven sent sometimes, and you can find something that you were intending to find, and then find so much more. And any opportunity you have to educate yourself further on a subject is going to help you out at some point.
Okay, I have another one. Can y'all tell us of a particular story since y'all have gotten into the work world of maybe a mistake or something that didn't go the way you planned it to and how you worked through that?
I didn't know we were getting fellowship interview questions. It's been a while since
Let me
I've
check
had
my
to do
notes.
this.
I have a good example. So we recruited a new physician into one of my practices very recently, and his first day was Monday the 17th. And so the plan was that we would import all of his electronic records into our clinic's database. We had the same electronic medical record. And starting day one, he would be able to chart out of his computer system as he usually did. Well, I get a call from my nurse, 7:30 Monday morning. Yeah, none of his patient charts are in our system. So I'm thinking, what in the world happened? I hang up, call IT, what's going on, what's going on? I get another call back. We found all his patient charts. All 4,000 of them have been dumped into the other clinic's database. So it was one of those moments where it's like, okay, plan A didn't work. What's plan B, plan C, plan D? And you kind of have to have that gut check of, is this a crisis? And how am I going to react to this? Because if I freak out, the doctor's going to freak out. All my employees are going to freak out. So that's when I stop and pick up donuts, come to the office and say, okay, let's get the paper charts out. Let's go back to the Stone Age. And we made it through the day, and the doctor was very, very reasonable about it. But when you can own those mistakes and when you can just have accountability for them and have a good plan B and C and D, you'll be safe.
You do.
I know, I can't remember.
There's lots of stuff that goes wrong every day, but it's like little things.
Yeah, I think the most important lesson out of that question is that you need to be able to admit when you've done something that maybe didn't go as planned, especially when you're dealing, in my position in my fellowship, I was also our interim strategic planning analyst. And that's a lot of data entry and research and numbers. And I mean, stuff gets miscalculated. And you just have to be the one to walk up to your superior and say, this isn't what we had intended, or it's not exactly what had been presented. And I think just the ownership is the most important lesson, not trying to hide it or blame someone else, because that's not the person that everyone wants to work with.
Yeah.
And I think it looks good if you can come back and say, here's the mistake, this is what happened, but here's how I plan to fix it.
Yes.
If you can follow up with a plan B, I think that really they'll respect that.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna give y'all a fellowship question. How have you seen your organizations prepare for the Affordable Care Act and/or maybe implement electronic health records? You can choose one of the two, because I don't know if too many people are preparing for the Affordable Care Act. They don't know what's really going on. But what changes are y'all seeing?
The hospital I did my fellowship at was trying to prepare, but it was the most slow, arduous process. I don't think they're even still there yet, and I haven't been there since May. And the physician I work for is, it's not something that we're ready to take on just yet either. And so as important as it is and as much as it's in the headlines, I would say that there's still quite a few places that aren't ready for it.
I think it's funny, I hear a lot of the executives that have a more seasoned career say things like, oh, this is just another one of those things. It happens about every 10 years in healthcare. Just buckle down, we'll get through it. But meanwhile, they are doing a lot of planning in terms of the electronic side of things. I hear a lot of talk about the ICD-10 coming out, and I guess that's recently been pushed back. So lots of preparation, and like she said, it's very arduous. It takes forever. And trying to get a physician to change their way of practice is trying to get an act of Congress, basically. So it's very, very slow, lots of patience, education on what the meaningful use standards are and how to meet those always helps, because then you can say, Dr. So-and-so, I understand that you don't want to record it this way, but, and then you have the backup of being able to know what those standards are.
Right. I think at College Station Medical Center, we've seen a lot of meaningful use information come through, and just really being able to understand that you're going to have a lot of different vendors saying, "Oh, prepare for 2013 meaningful use." Well, meaningful use is a huge category, and it doesn't mean that you have to follow every single category in it. It's you have to start meeting certain standards within it. So I've seen a lot of preparation as far as documenting appropriately, where to document, and the challenges I think that we've run into is having to communicate that to a large number of people, and relay the importance and get the training on this is when it should be done. So it can be kind of arduous and tedious to follow up on those different, it seems very nitpicky, and just very nitpicky details that you have to keep concentrating on.
And where I currently am, they were a freestanding hospital for almost 40 years, not affiliated with any system. So as you can imagine, the changes going into an organization that has around 130 hospitals and trying to catch up with what they have in place, and not that they weren't far along on their own, but just having to transition to what the bigger organization has, and then meaningful use on top of that. We are not there yet either. So.
I was just wondering how much you use has social media and networking, LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, impacted you as far as marketing or branding yourself or the organization that you're with? Or have you seen where it can actually hurt you going from being a student and maybe using some of that, those social media sites to the professional positions that you're in right now? Any comments on that?
I'm the biggest LinkedIn fan
Yeah,
ever.
I
am
yeah.
obsessed with that website. I love it. I think it's so appropriate and so such a good way to stay connected and just to help you browse jobs. I swear some of the jobs on there are just amazing, and you wouldn't have seen them anywhere else but LinkedIn. So I can't say enough about it. That's my only advice.
I think personally, I'm not as big on using it for my own personal uses, but as far as the industry goes, I've seen a lot of battles between physicians want to use a lot of social media. I mean, it sounds great, it's free advertising, but there's a lot of things that come with that in terms of you have to be very careful about HIPAA violations through social media, as well as you don't want too many people disclosing too many things online, and so who has access to that site, who has the ability, the administration rights, those types of things, it becomes pretty sticky. So our organization right now has kind of just said hands off for a while, but I see a lot of organizations that are utilizing it as a tool for them.
Personally, I think that if you are going to be on any social media site, what you post on there and needs to be very, very professional. In the off chance that somebody does look, I don't know if it's legal or not, but occasionally employers might look at your Facebook page to see, hey, what's this person all about? I want to learn a little bit more. And if they see something negative, then you definitely don't want to post that on there. I do agree with what Christina said. LinkedIn is very, very valuable. You have a professional resume out there. You have network connections, and it's a great tool for you to use. And so I would just make sure that you maintain that LinkedIn site to reflect what's going on. And so if there is ever an opportunity, somebody may say, oh yeah, I saw someone's resume on LinkedIn. They have that exact experience, and they may reach out to you. So, but I would be careful with what is posted on Facebook and Twitter if you tweet, I think is what it's called. Yes. So.
I've like LinkedIn also, I haven't used it as much as I probably could, but one thing that I have started doing is just kind of looking at people who are further along in their career and seeing what positions they had along the way, because that was one of my questions I always asked as a student is, okay, how did you get to where you are? But really now you can just go look on LinkedIn and see, what cities they were in and what positions they had and what they did at it, if they put that much detail. Right now I just have my titles and the years because I haven't had enough time to go back and put what it actually did, but it is a great tool to use. And I would suggest keeping Facebook profiles private as long as you're interviewing, because people do go on and Google the name or get on Facebook and look at the name. And so just make sure you're always representing the school well and yourself. So.
I did have one last question, actually. As managers and leaders, you deal with different personalities on a day-to-day basis. How do you get past, the more difficult personalities or trials that you've faced trying to lead people?
I think one of the main challenges is sometimes you have people who work really, really hard and they do really, really well, and they're engaged, they're dedicated to the organization, they're dedicated to patients. And then you have other employees who are just the opposite. And I think holding them accountable is very, very important as far as the different personalities go. I found that positive reinforcement, basically, hey, I really like the way you did that. Thank you so much. It made such a difference to this person or this person or even the patient. And I think that as managers, we have to be really, really careful, because we always have those go-to people that we know will get the job done. They'll do it with a smile, and they're happy to do it. And then you start, it's not fair. You start giving them more and more work, and you hold them to the same standard, and this other person just isn't doing it. So I think in some ways, it's very challenging to hold somebody accountable who may get angry or who may deny something. And something that was mentioned earlier is taking accountability. Hey, I make mistakes all the time, and I can own that and say, you know what, I'm so sorry. This is what I learned from it. I'll do it differently this next time. And just having an attitude of being able to learn and showing that to your staff, and supporting them, and just staying on top of things, even if it is challenging for you, I think is the most important thing for you. It's the most important thing for your office, and of course, it'll be reflected in the care that's provided to the patients as well.
I think a lot of it will depend. You'll grow as a manager, and you'll learn what your style is and how you interact with your employees, and what works, and what works with one employee might not work with another employee. What I've learned about those people that have kind of the gritchy attitude, where there's a lot of pushback and there's a lot of, mostly they probably just want to be heard. And so I like to have a sit down and, what's going on? I'm picking up a lot of tension with you. Can you talk to me about that? And sometimes it's an easy fix, and sometimes the person has a bad attitude, and you can go through that a couple times, and then eventually they might need to look for other opportunities. But I find myself having the conversation with employees a lot of times where I'm sorry that you're unhappy with this, and I understand that it's not what you want to do, but the only choice you have in the matter is your attitude. So at this point, are you going to choose a good attitude, or are you not? And then we can move forward usually from that point.
I would say that's a really valuable lesson you learn a little bit in grad school, because you work in a lot of teams, but once you're in the real world, I guess, out of school, you really are forced to learn how to deal with different personalities, and it's different than school. I mean, this is a real job. You're really accountable for your actions and how someone else's actions affect you. And I think if you can learn how to deal with different personality types well, you'll be so thankful, and it'll become so much easier, because you'll know, certain personality types take certain words or, ways of approaching the issue. So.
And if you're dealing with difficult physicians, you need to have backup. You need to have the rule written on a piece of paper, printed off a real website, not just, something from a meeting. But physicians are very black and white, and you're not going to move them if you don't have some facts. So.
Any further questions?
What do you know now that you wish someone told you back when you first started as a healthcare administrator or fellow?
I know mine jumped right out at me. When I was in school and even undergrad, I was very career focused, and I'm always thinking, what do I have to do to get to where I want to be next? And what I learned most in my fellowship is that you have to really balance your personal life and your priorities in life, and getting the dream job at 25 is not the be-all, end-all, and you really sacrificing for what makes you happy versus a career is invaluable, really is.
I would say one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is to never, ever, ever, ever burn a bridge, because you never know who you might need. So make friends with everybody. Make friends with the janitor. Make friends with the guy who cooks the cookies. Make friends with everybody in your hospital, because when you build those relationships and then you need something, it's so much easier. Oh, that's Stephanie. I remember her. She stops and says hi to me in the hall every day. So every time you interact with somebody, you're building a relationship. Focus on that. Make it an intention. Make it not by accident. Build a relationship with everybody who you cross paths with.
Absolutely. That's a good one. One of the most valuable things I took from my fellowship is, or rather my internship, is I had a nun sit down and talk to me, and we were just interviewing, and she said, I asked her, well, what's the most valuable piece of advice that you could give to me as a young woman and starting a career in healthcare? And she said, set your boundaries and work hard when you are at work. And when it's time to go home, you need to go home. And she emphasized putting family first. And I think being a wife and a mom, it can sometimes be difficult because it's 7 o'clock and you're almost done and you just want to finish up that project, but you need to know it's okay to go home. And just work hard while you're at work. And as leaders of employees, it's also important that you allow your staff to put their family first. So just remember to always put people first, and I guarantee you'll have great results.
I think Christina talked on it earlier, and I'm not a bad dresser, I don't think, but there were times where, I wore dangly earrings when that really wasn't appropriate for that day, or, I always keep extra pantyhose in my desk because one day our division vice president was there and my pantyhose slit all the way down the side, and in our organization we need to wear pantyhose, and so always having backup, just being aware that people are looking at you and watching you and how you carry yourself and how you dress, and it's something that you don't have to go get a real job to figure out, but just learning that early on can help prevent accidents from happening later on.
We want to thank you all so much for coming. We appreciate all the input that you gave us. And thank you all so much for coming as well for the Women's